I'll never forget the summer that I finally finished college, just not for the right reasons. Before starting work, I had finally saved up enough of my own money to plan a road trip that would span about 3.5 weeks of the summer. The plan was to drive along the East Coast, from Long Island to Florida, periodically stopping along the way for a day or two at a time, but my main destination was Florida. I planned to stay at the beach for 2 weeks and then drive back, making a few more stops along the way. It was going to be an excellent road trip, and it was, at least up until the drive home. It all started on my last day in Florida. I decided to spend my last few hours down by the water, and then at around 4 p.m., I would begin my drive back home. And surprisingly, everything was going as planned. The weather was amazing, and the beach was the least packed that it had been since I'd shown up. I spent about an hour down near the water, and then headed back to my towel and began drying myself off. When it came time to leave, I reached into my bag for my car keys as well as my wallet, and to my surprise, my wallet was nowhere to be found. As soon as I realized that it wasn't there, I began looking around in the sand around my towel, but it was nowhere in sight. The only thing I could think of, or hope for really, was that I somehow left it in my car, like maybe it fell out of my bag or something. So I quickly gathered my things and made my way over to my car, keeping my fingers crossed the whole way, just hoping that my wallet would be inside. Turns out, it wasn't necessary though, because as I was walking toward my car, I was flagged down by a tall, brown-haired man with large glasses that made his eyes look magnified. The man ran up to me, and he was holding something in his hand that I recognized as my wallet. And as he handed it back to me, he claimed that he found it in the sand and he had been looking for its owner. It seemed a little odd, but after inspecting my wallet and seeing that everything was still there, I just passed it off as him being a good Samaritan. I thanked the man and offered him a couple bucks for his trouble, but he declined, and after a very brief conversation, we parted ways. As soon as my wallet was back in my bag, I began walking toward my car and started my journey back home. The plan was for me to drive through Florida and into Georgia before stopping for the night. And honestly, I'm surprised I made it out of Florida before midnight because of how thick the traffic was at some points. The only good thing about the traffic was that it gave me a clear look at my surroundings. And I'll be honest, I'm almost freaked out at one point. You see, I had been sitting in a row of cars, waiting for a light to turn from red to green at an intersection. And as I looked around me and through my rearview mirror, I noticed someone who looked familiar, sitting in the car behind me. I could have sworn that I was looking at the man who returned my wallet. I grew concerned for a moment because I had been driving for an hour and a half at that point and was wondering why he would be following me. But as the light turned green and I began driving forward, I just figured that it might have been a coincidence and that the person behind me probably just looked like the man I had met earlier that day. I continued my drive without any problems and eventually made my way into Georgia. And at around midnight, I decided to find a motel that I could stay at. I was never really picky about my rooms, so I just picked the first one that I saw a sign for. And to my luck, they had empty rooms. I quickly checked in and began making my way to my room. And it was at that point I began to feel like something was seriously wrong. I walked my way up to the outside staircase to the second floor of the motel rooms and eventually found the one that was mine for the night. I went inside and quickly locked the door behind me. I tried to brush off the strange feeling that someone was following me. About an hour passed that I had been inside my room, and I was beginning to finally get tired. Before going to bed, I made the decision to look out the window to make sure that my car was still there. That was always a huge fear of mine, that I would get stranded somewhere after having my car stolen. When I looked out of the window, I was not only surprised, but terrified. Standing near my car and looking through the back windows was someone who I undoubtedly recognized as the man I had met at the beach in Florida. I quickly stepped away from the window and hoped that he hadn't seen me, and stepped over to the phone that was in the room so I could call the police. I informed them that I was being stalked and I needed help as soon as they could get here. To my surprise, 2 police officers were at my door within a few minutes, and I explained to them what had happened. They went and spoke to the woman at the front desk and found out that the man had rented a room for the night. At first, they planned to simply talk to him, and it honestly seemed like they thought I was over-exaggerating. However, their mood changed once they ran his information and found out that the man had a warrant out for his arrest and had allegedly been involved in another missing person case. The police apprehended the man, and since I certainly wasn't getting any sleep that night, I ended up checking out of my room and driving through the rest of the night. The scariest moment of my life came after one of the best trips to California that I had ever had. It was the year that I turned 21, and I decided to visit one of my friends that went to college in Cali. It was an unreal experience compared to what I was used to back in Tennessee, and it was really sad when it came to an end. But after spending about a week with my friend and hanging out on the boardwalk, it was finally time for me to head home. My plan was to split the drive up into 4 days, and if all went well, I would be back home by the afternoon of my second day of driving. The trip ended up taking a little bit longer though. After, I almost died. The first leg of the drive wasn't too eventful. I made my way from California through Nevada and then down into Arizona, where I stayed at a hotel for the evening. The next day was when things all took a downward turn. I began that portion of my drive early in the morning, and I felt like I was making really good time. That was until I heard the dreaded sound of a flat tire. As soon as I heard it and felt the car driving a bit differently, I pulled myself off to the side of the road and began hoping that I had a spare in the car. Lucky for me, under the bottom of the trunk was a donut that came with the car. Now, anyone that knows tires will tell you that you really don't want to be doing any heavy driving on a donut. So my plan was just to slap on the tire for now until I could get to an auto shop where I could purchase a replacement. Things don't always go as we plan them though. I began to continue on my route according to the GPS, and as I entered Texas, I noticed a bridge coming up ahead. Now, at this point, it was around noon, and the road was surprisingly packed. I was probably doing about 40 to 50 miles per hour as I made my way onto the relatively narrow bridge, with guardrails that looked as if they hadn't been maintained or changed since they had been put up. I should point out that I was already one of those people who got nervous as they drove over bridges, but this one set me over the top. As I made it about halfway across the bridge, I heard a terrifyingly loud banging sound as I hit a small pothole. The spare tire that I had placed on my car didn't simply pop and deflate, it literally burst. The pressure from the explosion caused the passenger side of my car to lift off the ground a bit before dropping back down onto the exposed rim. It was at this point that I lost control of the car and it began pulling to the right as I panicked. The passenger side of my car impacted with the rusted guardrail and blasted through it. Thankfully, the rest of the guardrail held up, and the majority of my car remained on the bridge. Only the front passenger side tire was hanging off, though that didn't make me feel much better. I opened my door as quick as I could and stepped out onto the bridge as cars continued to pass by going the opposite way. I called my insurance company and the authorities, who had to shut the bridge down for 2 hours until a tow company could come and pull my car out of the way. As I waited, I happened to look over the side of the bridge, and had the car not been stopped, I would have fallen what looked like 35 feet or more into the river below. The first semester of my second year at NYU was finally coming to an end, and despite it being a successful term, it was by far the strangest semester I ever had. Most of my friends that I had made the previous year ended up not returning that semester. And to make things more awkward, my roommate wasn't the most normal of people. He was a very nice person once you got to know him, but at first, he could come off as a bit rude and quirky. Robbie also had a bit of an anger issue, but thankfully, at least during the school year, it never really came out. By the end of the semester, the two of us actually grew quite close. And because I happened to be driving home for winter break, the two of us decided to make it a road trip. I lived in Texas at the time, so it was going to be a long drive for me, and since Rob lived in Kentucky, I was more than happy to drop him off. It gave me the chance to have a driving buddy for at least half of my trip. And at first, the drive was going really well. We jammed out to some music, grabbed a bunch of fast food and coffee whenever we needed it, and had a really good time talking to one another. That was until Robbie got a text from his girlfriend at the time, who went to NYU with us. As soon as Robbie reacted to the text, I sort of figured out what happened. She had clearly just broken up with him, and it sent him into a spiral. He began ranting about how bad of a decision it was for her to break up with him, and even tried getting me to give him my phone to text her about it while pretending to be me. I, of course, told him that wasn't going to happen. That's not healthy, and he needed to work this one out on his own. Robbie wasn't too fond of that response and began raising his voice as he talked to me. I told him that he should just try to relax, and that he could just call her when he got home, and things would work out how they're supposed to. And I don't know how, but somehow he got the idea he should just go to her house. Now, there are two problems with that. At least, the first is, that's creepy. You can't do that, especially since, and this is the next problem, the girl lived back in New York. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he asked me if I would be willing to turn the car around and head back to New York so that he could explain to her, in his words, her mistakes. Needless to say, that my answer was a profound no, to which he once again began to yell at me, which I expected. What I didn't expect was what he did next. Rob's face turned red as he began screaming at the top of his lungs about how horrible everyone is, and that he should be able to just take what he wants. It was at this moment that he began reaching into his pocket and pulling out a bright yellow box cutter. At that moment, his face appeared to calm down, and his expression went blank as he turned and pressed the unopened box cutter into my ribcage and told me to pull over. I had never seen Rob like this, so I didn't even question him. I pulled over to the sidewalk where he forced me out of the car before hopping over to the driver's seat. Once he was in control of the car, Rob quickly accelerated and pulled a very dangerous U-turn in the middle of traffic. He obviously wasn't in the right frame of mind, and he didn't realize that my cell phone was still in my pocket. And because I couldn't be sure that he wasn't going to hurt anyone, I called the police and reported my car stolen. I explained to the dispatch what had happened, and Robbie ended up being arrested as he made his way into Pennsylvania. Highway Patrol spotted my car and managed to pull him over without anyone getting hurt.